Dear students, in this video I am going to explain you usage of despite and in spite of correctly. So let's get started. Despite and in spite of are prepositional expressions. In spite of and despite have a similar meaning to although. They express a contrast between two things. We use in spite of and despite with the noun, verb plus ing form, and the fact that. Let's understand the usage of despite and in spite of with help of few examples. Despite the heavy traffic, we got there on time. Here despite is followed by the heavy traffic. So traffic here is noun. In spite of the heavy traffic, we got there on time. Again, we have just replaced despite with in spite of. You need to understand that despite is a single word, whereas in spite of are three words, in, spite, and of, and the usage of both the words are exactly the same. Let's take a look at another example. In spite of the law, people continue to use mobile phones while driving. Here again, in spite of is followed by a noun. Despite the law, people continue to use mobile phones while driving. You will again find here that in spite of is just replaced by despite, rest of the things remain same. Let's take a look at another example. Despite being much older than others, he won the race. In spite of being much older than others, he won the race. Here you will notice that despite and in spite of are followed by verb plus ing. Rest of the things remain the same. Let's take another example where despite and in spite of are followed by verb plus ing. Despite having a headache, I had a great birthday. In spite of having a headache, I had a great birthday. Here both despite and in spite of are followed by verb plus ing form. We need to note one more point here, that we don't use that clause after in spite of or despite. Rather, we use in spite of the fact that or despite the fact that. This means that after in spite of and despite, you only need a noun or verb plus ing form. You cannot put a clause that has a subject and a verb. So if you put a clause, then it has to be accompanied by the fact that. In spite of the fact that he worked very hard, he didn't pass the exam. Despite the fact that he worked very hard, he didn't pass the exam. So here in both the cases, in spite of and despite are followed by the fact that. So if you write in spite of that he worked very hard, he didn't pass the exam, or despite that he worked very hard, he didn't pass the exam, that would be wrong. So here in spite of and despite, when followed by that clause, there has to be the fact in addition to that. So here you will also notice one more thing, that in spite of and despite are used similarly as we use although. So here if you get a statement, although he worked very hard, he didn't pass the exam, and you are asked to use or begin with in spite of or despite, you will simply remove although and you will add in spite of the fact that he worked very hard, he didn't pass the exam, or despite the fact that he worked very hard, he didn't pass the exam. Let's take a look at another example. Despite the fact that it was raining, the football team continued their training session. In spite of the fact that it was raining, the team continued their training session. Here again, despite and in spite of are followed by the fact that. You need to note that in spite of is written as three separate words. Students usually make a mistake when they write in spite of. They write in spite together. So you need to remember that in spite of is written as three separate words, and we never use of with despite. Despite is never followed by of. So if you write off with despite, the statement will be wrong. And one more thing you need to remember here, that we always use a comma in statement with in spite of and despite. Punctuation is very important. If you skip putting a comma in the statement, you will lose 1 mark in transformation of sentences. I would like you to take a note of common mistake that is made by students. If you are given a statement, although he was hungry, John did not eat, and you're instructed to begin with despite. If you write, despite he was hungry, comma, John did not eat, it is incorrect. So why is the statement incorrect? Because the words despite and in spite of are prepositions and not subordinating conjunctions. This means that after these words, you only need a noun or verb plus ing or that clause with the fact that. You cannot put a clause that has a subject and a verb. So let's take a look at what is the correct form of using despite. So the statement was, although he was hungry, comma, John did not eat. We had to begin with despite. If you write, despite his hunger, comma, John did not eat, this is the correct form because hunger here is used as a noun. So if you write, despite he was hungry, comma, John did not eat, it is incorrect because we cannot use a clause after despite or in spite of. Here, that clause here means that a subject with a verb. So we cannot use a clause after despite and in spite of. The statement will be incorrect then. Let's take a look at another example. Although she had a broken arm, comma, she played the game. Here you have to begin with in spite of. In spite of her broken arm, she played the game is the correct form. Again, if you write, in spite of she had a broken arm, she played the game, that will be incorrect. You might have noted that all these examples follow this format: despite or in spite of plus noun and the main clause. Let's take a look at one more example. Although he had no time, comma, he stopped to help. You have to begin with despite. Despite he had no time, comma, he stopped to help. That is incorrect because here again you are using a clause with a subject and a verb. It is incorrect. So the correct form is, despite having no time, he stopped to help. Or you can write, despite the fact that he had no time, comma, he stopped to help. Now it's time for a quick recap. We have studied that despite can be used with verb plus ing or the fact that or a noun. For example, although he is ill, comma, he took his exam. You have to begin with despite. So you will write, despite being ill, comma, he took his exam, or despite the fact that he was ill, comma, he took his exam, or despite his illness, he took his exam. Again, I would like you to note here that if you write despite he is ill, he took his exam, that will be incorrect. Same thing is followed with in spite of. In spite of is used with verb plus ing or the fact that or a noun. So if you get the same statement and you are asked to begin with in spite of, although he is ill, comma, he took his exam, you are asked to begin with in spite of. In this case, you will write, in spite of being ill, he took his exam. In spite of the fact that he was ill, he took his exam. Or, in spite of his illness, he took his exam. Again, I will like you to repeat that if you write, in spite of he is ill, he took his exam, that will be incorrect. I hope all of you are clear with usage of in spite of and despite. In case you have any doubt, please let me know in the comment section. Thank you so much.